The night was as still as death itself over the Alabama plantation, the moonlight casting a ghostly glow over the rows of cotton and tobacco fields. The air, heavy with the scent of the earth and the sweat of the enslaved, carried the sound of the overseer's whip cracking through the stillness. It was a sound that had become synonymous with oppression, with pain, and with the relentless grip of a system that sought to break the bodies and spirits of those it enslaved. But in the heart of this very system, in the deepest corners of the Harrington plantation, a giant walked. Sam, towering over the other enslaved, his muscles rippling with the power he had cultivated through years of forced labor, was a man who carried more than just strength. He carried a burning rage, a deep, simmering hatred for the system that had robbed him of his humanity. And his size, his strength, had made him both a prized asset and a dangerous threat to the masters who thought they controlled him. For years, Sam had bent his body to the will of the Harringtons, carrying the heaviest loads, tending to the fields, and serving in whatever way they demanded. But his mind was never shackled. He saw the brutality for what it was, an unrelenting force designed to strip away dignity and life from those who were nothing more than property. It was this realization, this unshakable understanding of his own worth and the injustice that surrounded him, that would set him on a path of defiance, a path that would lead to betrayal, bloodshed, and the impossible revenge that would echo through the very heart of the plantation system. And even when he was hanged twice, when they thought they had crushed his spirit, Sam would prove that no man, no matter how much they tried to break him, could ever be truly defeated. For in the dark corners of Alabama's woods, the giant would rise again, and the day of reckoning would come. Before we delve into this tale of strength and vengeance, I want to know where you're watching from. What time is it in your part of the world? And what would you do if you were given the chance to defy a system that had enslaved you for life? Drop a comment below, and if you're drawn to stories of vengeance, rebellion, and the price of freedom, hit subscribe. What you're about to hear is the story of a giant who rose from the grave, seeking retribution that would never be forgotten. The Harrington plantation was an empire of wealth and brutality, sprawling across the land in every direction. Towering oak trees lined the grounds, their thick branches providing little protection from the sun. The cotton fields stretched endlessly, the white fibers seemingly floating in the air like ghosts of the past. To outsiders, it was a model of Southern prosperity, wealthy, proud, and untouchable. To those who toiled beneath the weight of the system, it was a prison, a place where the screams of the enslaved were drowned out by the sound of the master's orders. In the heart of this plantation stood Sam, a man whose size was only matched by the quiet fury that burned within him. At 7 feet tall, he was a giant among the others, his muscles honed through years of grueling labor, his back scarred from countless lashes. His hands were calloused from picking cotton, from working the fields, from carrying the heavy burdens that were demanded of him. His presence was undeniable, his strength a symbol of the brutal power that had been forced upon him. But Sam was more than just his physical size. He was a man of deep thought, of quiet rebellion. He had seen the injustices that plagued his people, the ones who were whipped, beaten, and broken by the system. He had heard the cries of the men and women who had been ripped from their families, their lives, and their homes, and he had felt the sting of betrayal, knowing that his own people were constantly betrayed by the very system that kept them chained. For years, Sam had fought his own battle, a battle that no one else could see. He had fought the system with every muscle in his body, and yet, despite all his strength, he was still bound by the chains of slavery. But what the masters didn't understand, what they didn't see, was that Sam was not just a slave, he was a man who could not be broken. The overseers knew Sam well. His massive frame made him a prized worker, someone who could carry out the toughest tasks with ease. They feared him, respected him, and used his strength to their advantage. But deep inside, Sam had grown resentful of the way they treated him, of the way they treated all of his people. He saw their cruelty for what it was, a means of keeping them all in line, of maintaining control over their bodies and their lives. One evening, after the work had ended and the sun dipped below the horizon, Sam stood at the edge of the cotton fields, looking out at the darkening landscape. His mind was heavy with thoughts of his future, of the life he had been born into, and the one he could never escape. He had heard the whispers of rebellion among the other slaves, but something in him told him that a small uprising wouldn't be enough. Something in him told him that the only way to truly break free would be to strike at the heart of the plantation system itself. That night, as he lay in his small quarters, Sam made a decision. He would no longer be a tool for the masters. He would no longer allow himself to be used and abused for their gain. He would fight back, not with brute force alone, but with the power of his mind. He would outwit them. He would make them feel the same fear that he had felt every day of his life. And so, the plan began. Sam would strike at the heart of the plantation, the overseers, the masters, the very system that kept him bound. He would make them pay for the years of suffering he had endured. He would take revenge on those who had taken everything from him. But he knew that to carry out his plan, he would need to be patient, to bide his time. The overseers were always watching, always looking for an excuse to punish him, to break him. Sam knew that he couldn't act in anger, but rather with the precision of a man who had lived in the shadows for far too long. He had to wait for the right moment. And so, Sam waited watching, planning, preparing for the moment when his revenge would come. The giant was about to make his move, and when he did, the plantation would never be the same. The weeks that followed Sam's quiet decision were filled with subtle changes on the plantation's small, almost imperceptible shifts that only he seemed to notice. The overseers, once so confident in their control over the slaves, began to feel uneasy. It wasn't just Sam's size that made him intimidating, but the quiet fire that had begun to burn behind his eyes. He was no longer just a tool of labor. Sam was becoming something else entirely, a symbol of the fear and anger that lay dormant within the hearts of those who were oppressed. Master Bartley, the plantation owner, had begun to grow wary of Sam. He had heard the rumors from his overseers about Sam's growing influence, about the whispers among the other slaves. He had always seen Sam as a valuable asset, someone who could carry out even the most grueling tasks with ease. But now, Sam's quiet defiance seemed to be spreading, like a slow-moving fire that threatened to consume everything in its path. One afternoon, as Sam worked in the fields, he overheard a conversation between two overseers. They were speaking in hushed tones, but Sam could make out the words clearly. "Something's different about him," one overseer said. "He's not the same Sam he was before. He's been too quiet, too calm." The other overseer nodded. "We need to keep an eye on him. If he's plotting something, we need to put a stop to it before it's too late." Sam's heart pounded in his chest as he listened. He had known that his actions would not go unnoticed, but hearing them talk about him in this way only fueled his resolve. They feared him, and he was ready to make them understand why they should. That evening, after the sun had set and the slaves were settling into their quarters, Sam made his way to the small cabin he shared with a few other men. He had spent years working in silence, doing his part without complaint, but now he knew the time had come to take action. In the dim light of the cabin, Sam sat with the other slaves, his mind racing. He had spent the last few weeks gathering information, learning the routines of the overseers, observing the weaknesses in the plantation's infrastructure. He knew that in order to succeed, he would have to be smart, to strike when the time was right. One of the men in the cabin, a young slave named Moses, looked at Sam with curiosity. "You're quiet tonight, Sam," he said. "What's on your mind?" Sam met his gaze, his eyes hard. "I've had enough, Moses. I can't keep living this life. We can't keep living like this." Moses frowned. "What do you mean? We don't have a choice. We have to work. We have to survive." Sam stood up, his massive frame filling the small cabin. "We don't have to survive. We need to fight back. We need to show them that we're not just animals. They can't treat us like this forever." Moses looked at him, unsure of what to say. "You're talking about rebellion, aren't you?" Sam's voice was low but filled with a quiet intensity. "It's not rebellion, Moses. It's justice. It's the reckoning we deserve." The room fell silent as Sam's words sank in. The other slaves looked at him with a mixture of fear and admiration. They had all known the pain of slavery, but Sam's words, his boldness, gave them something they had longed for, but never dared to dream of. "Hope," Sam continued, his tone fierce. I've been planning for months. We can strike. We can take back what's ours. But we have to be united. We can't afford to fail." The men in the cabin exchanged uncertain glances, but there was something in Sam's words that stirred them. For the first time in a long while, they felt a sense of possibility, but Sam knew that this wasn't going to be easy. The overseers would fight back. Master Bartley would not simply allow them to take back their dignity. Sam would have to be smart, he would have to strike fast, and when the time came, he would need to be ready. The following days were filled with tension. Sam watched the overseers closely, learning their patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. He knew that their routine was predictable, that they relied on the same methods of control and discipline. But Sam was different. He wasn't going to just accept his fate anymore. He was going to change the game. On a cool, overcast morning, Sam decided it was time. He had planned every detail, watched every movement, and now he would take action. The overseers were spread out across the plantation, keeping an eye on the slaves as they worked. It was the perfect opportunity. Sam and a small group of trusted slaves quietly made their way toward the overseers' quarters, where they had prepared a trap. It was simple, but effective. Using the very tools they were forced to work with, they would disable the overseers' ability to control the plantation. They would take back what was theirs. As they moved in silence, the tension in Sam's chest grew. This was it. The first step in his revenge. And there would be no turning back. As Sam and his group approached the overseers' quarters, they could hear the distant sound of the overseer's whip cracking in the distance. Sam motioned for the others to stay low, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. They were so close to the beginning of their fight. But then, something unexpected happened. A group of armed men emerged from the trees, led by none other than Master Bartley himself. They had been waiting for Sam's move. They had anticipated this rebellion. "Drop your weapons," Master Bartley shouted, his voice carrying across the fields. "You'll all be punished for this. We won't tolerate disobedience." Sam's heart sank. The trap had been sprung, but it was not the trap he had set. They had been outsmarted. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but even in this moment of danger, he refused to surrender. "We fight now," he said to his men, his voice steady. "There's no turning back. For freedom." With that, Sam and his group charged toward the overseers, ready to face whatever came next. The first shots rang out, and the chaos of the rebellion began. The battle that followed was brutal. Sam fought with all the fury of a man who had lost everything, who had nothing left to lose. His giant frame, once used for labor, now became a weapon, a force of nature that could not be stopped. But despite his strength, the numbers of Master Bartley's men began to take their toll. As the sun began to set, Sam knew that this would be the moment that defined him. He had fought for his freedom, for justice, for the lives of those who had suffered beside him. But whether he lived or died in this battle, he knew one thing. The plantation system would never be the same. The battle raged for hours, the sound of gunfire and the clash of metal filling the air. Sam's massive form moved through the chaos like a force of nature, his blows landing with a power that sent overseers and armed men flying. But even a giant could only fight for so long against so many. The plantation that had once been his prison was now the battleground for his rebellion. And Sam knew that his body would not withstand the tide of violence forever. As the skirmish continued, Sam felt the sharp sting of a bullet grazing his shoulder. The pain was immediate, but it was nothing compared to the overwhelming sense of determination that drove him forward. Every strike, every movement, was a step closer to his ultimate goal: revenge, freedom, and justice for those who had suffered under the cruelty of the plantation. But even as he fought, something darker began to cloud his mind. He knew that the fight could not be won through sheer strength alone. The overseers, despite their numbers, were losing their grip on the plantation. Sam had seen their fear in their eyes, heard it in their voices. But they weren't going to give up without a fight. The moment they realized they couldn't break him, they would resort to other means, other ways to silence him, to make an example of him. And so, as the battle continued, Sam found himself forced to make a choice. His body was beginning to fail him. The wounds were mounting scratches, cuts, and burns that, under different circumstances, might have killed a lesser man. Yet Sam kept fighting, kept pushing forward, driven by the burning desire to make sure his rebellion wasn't in vain. But then, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, something unexpected happened. The sound of the battle quieted. Sam's mind, fogged by blood loss and exhaustion, tried to make sense of what was happening. He turned, his eyes scanning the field, and saw them. The overseers were retreating. Master Bartley, his face red with rage, called for his men to fall back, but not before casting a venomous look in Sam's direction. It was as if the very idea of losing control of the plantation was too much for him to bear. Sam, despite his exhaustion, felt a strange sense of triumph rise in him. The tide had turned in their favor. The rebellion had been successful, at least for now, but just as the thought of victory settled in Sam's chest, he felt a sudden, sharp pain in his side. He gasped, his hand instinctively moving to his wound. But before he could process what had happened, he collapsed to his knees, his vision blurring. It was a trap. The overseers had pulled back, but in their retreat, they had left a hidden force behind a group of men on horseback, armed with rifles. One of them, a sharpshooter, had caught Sam in his weakened state. The bullet had pierced through his side, and blood flowed freely, staining the earth beneath him. Sam's breathing was labored as he tried to lift his head. He could hear the sounds of the retreating overseers, but he felt a cold emptiness beginning to settle over him. His body was failing, but his mind was still sharp, still filled with thoughts of the justice he had fought for. He had to survive. With every ounce of strength he could muster, Sam pushed himself back onto his feet. He stumbled, his legs buckling beneath him, but he refused to fall. He wasn't going to die like this, not with so much unfinished, not with his revenge so close at hand. But as he staggered forward, his strength finally gave out. The darkness crept in, and Sam fell to the ground, his world spinning. He was no longer in control. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the flickering image of Clara's face, her eyes filled with love and fear, the face of the woman he had fought for. Hours later, the world came crashing back in slow, painful waves. Sam's eyes fluttered open, but his vision was hazy, blurred by the blood loss and the weight of unconsciousness. He tried to move, but his body was heavy, sluggish, as though it no longer belonged to him. His breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to assess his surroundings. He was no longer on the battlefield. He was in a small, dimly lit room, the smell of herbs and damp wood thick in the air. His wounds were tended to, the bleeding stopped, but his body still felt like it was on fire. A hand touched his shoulder, and Sam turned his head slowly. There, standing beside him, was an older woman with a face lined with age and wisdom, her hair silvering at the temples. She was a healer, one of the slaves who had managed to escape the plantation before, and who now lived among the runaway slaves who had joined the growing rebellion. "You're alive," the woman said, her voice soft but firm. "You've been through hell, but you're still breathing. That's all that matters." Sam nodded slowly, his voice hoarse when he spoke. "They tried to kill me," he whispered, his thoughts muddled. "But I'm not dead yet," the woman chuckled softly. "You're a giant, Sam. The masters thought they could break you, but here you are, still standing." He let out a dry laugh, wincing from the pain in his side. "I don't know how much longer I can stand. My body's giving up on me. You'll rest now," she said gently. "You'll heal. But the fight's not over. The masters may have thought you were dead, but you're not. And they won't stop until they finish what they started." Sam's eyes closed for a moment, his body overwhelmed by exhaustion. But even as the pain in his side intensified, a new fire burned within him. They had thought they had won, thought they had hung him, broken him. But they had been wrong. He was still alive, and he had unfinished business. "I'm not done," he muttered, his voice low and full of resolve. "They'll regret underestimating me." Sam spent the next few weeks recuperating in secret, hidden among the escaped slaves who had formed a quiet rebellion. Every day, he grew stronger, both in body and spirit. His wounds healed, but the fire inside him, the desire for vengeance, for justice, never wavered. The overseers thought they had killed him. The masters thought they had silenced him. But Sam was not easily erased. His fight wasn't just for revenge. It was for freedom. It was for a world where people like him would no longer be bound by chains. And no matter how many times they tried to hang him, Sam would rise again. His war was far from over. The plantation, and the system that had built it, would never be the same again. The days that followed Sam's recovery were filled with quiet determination. Though his body had healed from the wounds inflicted by the hanging and the subsequent battle, his mind was sharper than ever, focused on the task ahead. He was no longer just the giant slave, the brute force that Master Bartley had used to do the heaviest labor. He was something more now, a symbol of resistance, a force of nature who had been reborn, stronger than ever, and hungry for revenge. He spent his time among the runaway slaves, growing his network, learning their ways, and making plans for the next phase of his rebellion. The first taste of freedom had been intoxicating, but it was clear to him that this war could not be won with mere sabotage or isolated acts of defiance. The system, the plantation itself, was the enemy, and to truly break it, Sam knew he would have to strike at its core. The first step was to gather more men and women to his cause. Though Sam had always been a natural leader, this time, he wasn't just offering physical strength, he was offering hope. He spoke to those who had suffered under the system, who had been beaten, betrayed, and silenced. He gave them a vision of a future where they could live free, free from the tyranny of the masters, free from the chains that bound them. His words were like a spark in dry grass, and soon, whispers of a rebellion, of a chance at freedom, spread like wildfire among the enslaved people on the nearby plantations. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of red and orange, Sam gathered the group of escaped slaves that had pledged to follow him. They met in the woods, far away from the prying eyes of the overseers, under the cover of darkness. The crackling of the fire in front of them was the only sound, and as Sam stepped forward to address the group, the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. "We've been pushed down for too long," Sam began, his deep voice carrying through the night air. "We've been treated like animals, like property. But we're not property. We're men and women. And we've got something the masters will never have. Freedom. And we're going to take it." His words resonated with the men and women around him. They nodded, their faces lit by the firelight, their eyes filled with determination. Sam's reputation had spread among the enslaved, and even though many had doubted the possibility of success, his presence brought a sense of purpose to their hearts. "But we can't do this alone," Sam continued. "We need to strike at the heart of the plantation system. We need to make them feel what we've felt. We need to show them that we're not afraid anymore." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sam could see the fire in their eyes now, the same fire he had seen when he first decided to take action. This was no longer just about revenge, it was about liberation. It was about creating a world where no one had to live in fear, where people like him could stand tall, unafraid of the chains that had once bound them. "We'll start small," Sam said. "We'll take out the overseers, one by one. We'll sabotage the plantation's operations, tear down the system from the inside. And once we've weakened them enough, we'll take the fight to the masters. We'll make them pay for what they've done." The plan was simple but audacious. They would target the overseers, their most immediate oppressors, taking them out quietly and without mercy. Then, they would disrupt the plantation's operations, sabotaging crops and destroying the tools of their forced labor. It was a methodical approach, one that would take time, but Sam knew it would shake the foundation of the plantation system. The group nodded, their faces set with resolve. They had all felt the sting of the master's cruelty, the weight of the system that had kept them bound in chains. Now, under Sam's leadership, they had a chance to do something about it. Days turned into weeks, and the rebellion grew. Sam and his group worked in the shadows, striking at the plantation's infrastructure, sabotaging crops, and making the overseers fear for their lives. One by one, overseers disappeared, some found dead, others mysteriously vanished into the night. The plantations trembled under the weight of these small, calculated attacks. But the true test was yet to come. Sam knew that the plantation owners would not allow this to continue. They would retaliate. And when they did, he had to be ready. He had grown stronger, his body hardened by his experiences, his mind sharp from years of quietly observing the workings of the plantation system. He knew how to outsmart them. He had learned from the best, the masters themselves. One evening, after another successful sabotage operation, Sam gathered his people once more. This time, there was a sense of urgency in the air. They had crossed a line, and the masters would soon come after them with everything they had. "We've done well," Sam said, his voice steady. "But we're not done yet. The masters won't sit idle forever. They'll come after us. We need to be ready." The group nodded, their faces serious. Sam's words had not just inspired them, they had hardened them, made them realize that this fight was about survival. They were no longer running from the plantation. They were taking the fight to the heart of the system. "We have one last thing to do," Sam said. "We go after Master Bartley. We take down the head of the snake." The plan was set. The group would infiltrate the plantation during the dead of night. They would make their way to Master Bartley's mansion, and they would take him down, just as Sam had vowed to do. It was risky, but Sam knew that this was the only way to truly break the plantation's hold over them. As the night of the raid drew closer, the tension among the group grew. They were nervous, but they were ready. Sam, with his immense strength and his calculated mind, led the way. They moved under the cover of darkness, using the shadows to their advantage. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly with the light of candles, unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon it. But as they approached the mansion, Sam's heart skipped a beat. Standing at the gates was an unexpected figure, Master Bartley himself. His eyes locked onto Sam's, a cold, calculating look in his gaze. The moment of truth had arrived. "You think you can take me down, Sam?" Master Bartley shouted, his voice echoing through the night. "You think you can escape the consequences of your actions?" Sam stepped forward, his muscles tense, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the final confrontation. "You took everything from me," Sam said, his voice low but filled with fury. "Now it's your turn." The air was thick with tension as Sam and Master Bartley locked eyes in the dim moonlight. For a brief moment, everything else seemed to fade away, the rustling of the trees, the creaking of the wooden gate, even the sounds of the rest of the group behind him. All that mattered was this final, fateful encounter. Sam's heart pounded in his chest, his blood rushing through his veins like wildfire. The years of suffering, of silent endurance, of watching his people suffer under the brutal hands of the masters, all of it had led to this moment. "You think you can just walk into my house and take what's mine?" Master Bartley's voice was full of venom, his words sharp as a blade, his hands clenched at his sides, but Sam could see the tremor in his stance, the fear that was beginning to take root. "I'm not here for your property," Sam said, his voice steady and filled with quiet rage. "I'm here for justice. I'm here for all those you've hurt, for the lives you've stolen." Master Bartley sneered, but Sam could see it in his eyes. He knew this was no longer just a fight for power. This was about survival. This was about something far deeper than pride. And Sam was prepared to show him that the plantation, the power, the wealth they'd built on the backs of the enslaved, had no power over him anymore. Without warning, Bartley lunged toward Sam, a gleaming silver pistol appearing in his hand. He fired, the shot ringing out like a crack of thunder. Sam dove to the side, the bullet whizzing past him, narrowly missing. He could hear the sharp intake of breath from his group behind him, but he was focused only on Bartley. Sam's instincts took over. He was faster than the master had anticipated. His giant frame was a weapon in itself, his speed a testament to the years of physical labor that had honed his body to perfection. He moved forward with a force that knocked Bartley to the ground, the gun slipping from his hand. Bartley struggled, his face twisted with rage and fear. "You're nothing!" Bartley shouted, kicking out at Sam. But his strength was no match for Sam's. "No," Sam replied, his voice low and resolute. "You're the one who's nothing. Your power, your wealth, it's all built on the suffering of others. You've never known what it means to truly live, to truly be free." Sam stood over him, towering like a mountain, his breath steady despite the pounding in his chest. The pain in his side, the wound from the earlier gunshot flared again, but he refused to let it slow him down. This was it, the final reckoning. He had fought too long, too hard, to let Bartley walk away unscathed. Bartley, now on the ground, looked up at Sam with wide eyes, his breath coming in quick gasps. "You can't kill me," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm the master here. I own everything." Sam shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Not anymore." With a swift motion, Sam grabbed Bartley by the collar and dragged him to his feet, forcing him to face the reality of the power he had wielded. The plantation had belonged to Bartley, but it would not belong to him any longer. Sam was determined to make sure of it. "You don't get to own people," Sam said, his grip tightening. "Not anymore." The overseers, who had been watching from the shadows, seemed unsure of what to do. They had seen their master fall, but none of them dared to step forward. They knew what was coming. They knew that Sam was no longer the slave they had once controlled. He was a force, and they were powerless to stop him. Bartley, eyes wide with desperation, tried one last plea. "I can give you anything. Gold. Land. You don't have to do this. Think of the power you could have. You don't need to kill me." But Sam's face remained hard. "You think you can buy me? You think your wealth and power mean anything to me now? I've seen too many lives destroyed by men like you. I won't let you keep taking." With a single, forceful motion, Sam threw Bartley to the ground. The master lay there, defeated and broken, his once proud figure now nothing more than a shell of the man he had been. Sam stepped back, his chest heaving with the weight of the moment. It was over, but even as the group behind him stood silent, some filled with awe, others with fear, Sam knew that this victory was bittersweet. Killing Bartley, bringing him to his knees, had not been the end he had imagined. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about breaking the cycle, about ensuring that no one would ever again have to live under the heel of someone like Bartley. The fight was far from over. The system that had kept the enslaved in chains would not crumble with one man's death. But this was a start, a catalyst. Sam had no illusions about the difficulty of the road ahead. There would be more battles, more bloodshed. But tonight, they had taken the first step. As Sam looked around, he could see the fear in the eyes of the overseers, the uncertainty of what came next. They had lost their master, and with him, their sense of control. Sam wasn't just a giant in size, he was a giant in the rebellion. And it was clear that his victory tonight had begun to change something in the air. "Tonight, we make a stand," Sam said, his voice firm, echoing through the night. "We take what's ours. We fight for every life, for every soul that's been torn apart by this system, and we won't stop until we've won." He turned to the others, their faces now filled with a mixture of hope and determination. This plantation, this system, it ends now. As they moved forward, the group of rebels followed Sam's lead, each one knowing that this night, the night they had fought for, had changed everything. They had toppled the master, the symbol of oppression, and now they were ready to tear down the rest of the system. With Bartley dead and the overseers uncertain of their next move, Sam's rebellion was just beginning. The flames of resistance had been ignited, and now they would burn bright, scorching everything in their path. The plantation that had once been a symbol of wealth and power was now a symbol of something else: defiance, strength, and the unbreakable will of those who had fought for their freedom. Sam, though victorious, knew that this was just the first battle. The war for true freedom had only just begun. The days following Master Bartley's death were marked by a heavy silence that settled over the land like a shroud. The plantation, once a well-oiled machine of power and wealth, was now in disarray. The overseers, who had once controlled the enslaved with fear and force, were now unsure of their place. The rebellion that had begun with a single act of defiance had grown into something far larger, something far more dangerous to the system that had oppressed them for so long. Sam, standing tall among the newly freed slaves, knew that their victory wasn't just the end of one man's life. It was the beginning of something far greater. But with the fall of Master Bartley, the battle was far from over. The larger forces that had created the plantation system, those who benefited from the subjugation of others, would not let the rebellion stand without retaliation. Sam had known this from the beginning. His fight was not just for revenge, it was for the future, for the generations that would come after him. But now, as the reality of their situation set in, Sam realized the depth of what he had started. The rebellion had ignited a fire within the enslaved, but it had also made enemies of those who were willing to do anything to preserve their control. As the night descended over the plantation, Sam gathered his people, those who had followed him, those who had joined him in this fight for freedom. They had made it this far, but Sam knew they could not stay. The plantation was no longer safe. There would be no rest for them here. The master was dead, but his legacy, the power of the system that had kept them down, would not die so easily. "We've done what we set out to do," Sam said, his voice firm as he addressed the gathered group. "We've toppled the man who thought he controlled us. But this isn't over. We need to keep moving, keep fighting. The battle is far from won." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. They were tired physically, emotionally, and mentally, but the fire in their eyes was undeniable. They had stood together. They had fought together. And now they were free. Sam's words had made them believe in something they had long since abandoned: hope. But Sam knew the cost of this hope. They couldn't simply walk away from this place. The world outside the plantation was just as hostile. They would be hunted by the law, by bounty hunters, by the families of the men they had killed. They had made powerful enemies, and those enemies would stop at nothing to reclaim what they had lost. "Where will we go?" one of the women asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "What happens now?" "We head north," Sam replied. "There's a place where freedom lives, where we can make a new life. The Underground Railroad. It's dangerous, but it's the only way." The group nodded, understanding the risks. They had heard of the Underground Railroad, the secret network that had helped so many slaves escape to freedom. But Sam knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger. There would be no safe passage, no easy journey. Every step they took would be a risk. "We'll have to be careful," Sam said. "But we've already taken the hardest step standing up. Now, we keep moving." The following days were filled with the quiet urgency of preparing for their journey. The plantation, once a symbol of control, was now a battlefield in the midst of rebellion. Sam and his group moved quickly, gathering what they could carry, and leaving behind the life they had known. But even as they prepared to leave, the fear of retribution loomed over them. Master Bartley's death had sent shockwaves through the community. Word had spread quickly, and the plantation owners, the overseers, and even the local law enforcement were already looking for them. As they made their way toward the edge of the plantation, Sam could hear the distant sound of horses' hooves. They were being followed. "Get moving," Sam said, urgency in his voice. "We don't have time." The group moved quickly, their steps quickening as the sound of the approaching riders grew louder. Sam's heart raced. He had planned this escape for weeks, but he knew there was no guarantee they would make it. The lawmen would stop at nothing to hunt them down. Just as they reached the edge of the plantation, Sam turned to look at the others. "Stay together. Stick to the woods. Keep quiet. We're almost there." But before they could move further, the riders broke through the trees, their figures silhouetted against the night sky. The group froze, the sound of their footsteps falling into silence. "Run!" Sam shouted. "Go!" The group scattered in different directions, moving as fast as they could. Sam grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her into the woods with him. They had made it this far, and Sam wasn't about to let them be caught now. He had already been hanged twice. He wasn't going to be stopped by anything. Nothing would take away the freedom he had fought for. The riders chased after them, their voices calling out in the night. But Sam and the others were fast, moving with the knowledge of the land. They knew the woods, the river, the hidden paths. It was their only advantage. For hours, they ran through the night, the sounds of the pursuit fading into the distance as they crossed rivers and streams, using the darkness to their advantage. But just as Sam thought they had lost the riders, they reached a clearing only to find a group of lawmen waiting for them. Sam's heart sank, but he knew there was no turning back now. With a look of determination, he turned to Clara, his voice filled with resolve. "This is it. No matter what happens, you get to safety. I'll keep them off you." Clara's eyes were filled with fear, but there was a quiet understanding between them. She knew what Sam was willing to sacrifice. "Promise me you'll survive," she whispered. "I will," Sam said, his voice steady. As the lawmen closed in, Sam stood his ground, facing them head-on. The fight was about to begin, but this time, he wasn't just fighting for revenge. He was fighting for the future of everyone who had ever been oppressed. The lawmen were not just after him, they were after every soul who had ever dreamed of freedom.